And good morning, everyone. My name's Simon Cameron. I'm the Chief Officer for the Workforce and Corporate Policy team here within COSLA. And for those of you that don't know, COSLA is the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities. And I'm the trauma-informed lead within the organisation. In terms of today, I'm going to run through some housekeeping just quickly with you, then we'll go into introduction. And we've got colleagues who are going to be doing presentations this morning that do have other commitments as well, so we won't hold back. In terms of, as I've said about housekeeping, just that first point about if we can keep our microphones muted when not speaking, but you're very welcome obviously to stay on camera. We are recording the session so that we can hopefully share this with colleagues across the country who haven't been able to join us this morning, and we did have a very high uptake for the session, which was great to see. So hopefully people will find the session of great interest. There will be time for general discussions after all of the inputs have been given today, but not time to discuss more specific feedback, as the session really is primarily focused in terms of raising awareness of the framework and the consultation that's going to be taking place. Clearly, if you do want to provide feedback, we very much encourage you to do so via the consultation and via the survey that will be coming out. So, and we'll obviously take on board all of the comments that do come back. We don't anticipate today that there will be any discussion of experiences of trauma, but obviously we would always say to everybody, please take care of yourselves and do what you need to do to stay safe and well. And if you need to take a break, please do so. And know that there are people there for you and able to support and help. So I think critical we make that point. So with that, the housekeeping being said, and clearly there's no fire alarm on Teams, but if there is one at your end, please make sure you exit your building as quickly and safely as promptly, and please feel free to use the facilities at any time. Hopefully you all know where they are. From our side of things, as I say, my name's Simon Cameron. I'm delighted my colleague Susan Ferguson from Scottish Government, who is Deputy Director in the Complex Care for Complex Care and the Mental Health Directorate, is co-chairing the session with me today. And Susan will have the pleasure of taking us through the question and answers after our inputs today. Clearly, it's key for Scottish Government and COSLA that we've got a commitment to trauma-informed practice. We want to not only make sure that people are properly aware, supported and able to deliver services in a trauma-informed way, but that we do progress to a world where all of our services are delivered in that trauma-informed manner. So that's a critical importance to us. And that comes from both most senior levels within Scottish Government, Deputy First Minister, who chairs the National Steering Group, and from our COSLA presidential team as well. In terms of today, as part of the training programme, working with our colleagues in NHS Education for Scotland, the Resilience Learning Partnership and the Improvement Service, we've been developing a framework to help any service and organisation in Scotland work towards becoming trauma. It highlights the key components of trauma-informed organisations, the systems and workforces, raising awareness of the activities that are most effective in supporting organisations in this work. And it helps organisations understand the impact and contributions of a trauma-informed approach over time for staff, for people affected by trauma, and the organisation's wider mission. And clearly across the public sector, where all of our services are there for anybody in our communities to be able to access and use on a daily basis, we need to make sure that we properly do that in all the ways possible that we can. Given we know colleagues and stakeholders will have very different degrees of familiarity with the training programme and a trauma-informed approach more broadly, today we're going to hear from, as I've said, our colleagues at NES, NHS Education Scotland, our lead, Sandra Ferguson, for the NTTP, who's going to give a brief overview of the development of the programme and its aims. We're going to hear about why trauma matters and the difference and what differences trauma-informed organisations, systems and workforces can make for people affected by trauma and all of our communities. And we're going to hear more about why the framework has been developed, its key aims and audience, and to learn about how you can obviously provide that feedback, which will be critical to the success of the document. And we do welcome all kind of thoughts that you will have on the document, because it is there to be a practical tool. It's not there to dissuade people. It's there to encourage and support people in the work that you're doing. So all of that being said, and hopefully Laura, just within time, not having overrun, I'm going to now pass across to Dr. Sandra Ferguson from NHS Education for Scotland, and Sandra's going to give us the overview of the National Training Programme. So Sandra, I believe you're going to take control of the screen and put up some slides, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Simon, and let me just see if I can do this, taking control of the screen and bring my slides up. So if somebody gives me a nod, hopefully when this appears, is that looking all right?
Yep, that's working, Sandra.
Good, perfect. So absolutely delighted to be here and given a bit of an overview of the National Trauma Training Programme and the ambition in Scotland of having a trauma-informed and responsive workforce, as Simon's been outlining. I'm really proud of the fact that this approach has been a really key partnership between those with people with expert by experience, those that by expertise by profession, those by expertise by leadership, and sometimes we all have several of those roles. I am just sort of losing my slides here, and my apologies. Okay, let me just waiting for an absolute second and see if I can get these back up, because I don't know what that happened on your side, but they have gone on my side. Let me just start again. Hopefully.
We could see them, so I'll give you a thumbs up, Sandra. There you go, that's you.
Perfect. So a couple of things that I wanted to kind of outline, and one is the fact that sometimes people are confused by the fact that this is badged by as NHS Education for Scotland. And although I'm based there, the ambition of this programme is far broader than that. It's across all of the services across Scotland. And although that's where we're based, it's a partnership across all of our, across all sectors and across the different agencies. So absolutely delighted to be in that position of working together in that trauma-informed approach. What's also on this slide is our trauma flower. And this is a sort of our attempt to try and summarise the key elements of what trauma-informed approach is. So in the centre of the flower are the principles that we know are key to being trauma-informed in the way that we are. And that's the way that we are people that we work for, in terms of the people we serve in our services, but also the people we work with. Round those principles are the four traditional R's of trauma-informed practice: realising prevalence, recognising impact, responding appropriately, and resisting re-traumatisation. I'm going to pick up a little bit more about that as I go through this presentation, but these are sort of some of the key principles that we think about. What are we talking about? Then the next ring of the circle is what we like to sort of refer to as our Scottish R's, the things that we've added that we think are key to this process. And the first thing is that this is ultimately about relationships with people. Trauma happens in relationship and recovery happens in relationship. We all potentially have a role to play in offering a different kind of relationship that can help people on their road to recovery. The other R there is around respect and resilience, understanding that the things that people have got people to where they are today often need to be, we need to understand, we need to bring that framing to, and then we need to help to walk alongside them on their journey of recovery. The last two rings are utterly to what we're going to talk about today, because we know that none of that is possible unless we have that supporting policies, systems, environments and people. And this is where the contribution of the framework today, as that you're going to see today, is going to be absolutely essential to how we take this forward in a sustainable and implementable way across Scotland over the next few years. So I'm just going to try and get into some of the why of this. So this diagram, I'm moving from flowers to trees. We do have a bit of a botanical theme here, but this represents hundreds, if not thousands, of research articles that have been published over the last 20 to 30 years. We're very proud of the fact that we're very embedded in research, and that's critical to the way we think about all of this as we go forward. So I want to just take a bit of a deep dive into some of this. So at the roots of the trees are these experiences of that some people have in life, sadly, and I'm going to give you a bit more about the prevalence of that. We're not just talking about stressful events, we're talking about domestic abuse, childhood abuse, life-threatening illnesses, car crashes, terrorism. These are things that not only threaten your sense of safety or threaten your life, they threaten the sense of safety of people that you love and care for too. Sometimes we're talking about things that happen once, and sometimes we're talking about things that happen over many, many years, and that's what we call complex trauma. We also know that this can happen across the lifespan, so sometimes it's in childhood, sometimes it's in adulthood. You'll also notice that that other adversity and poverty, racism, all of these other factors feed into this process, and it's important we think about all of those things together. At the centre of the trunk of the tree are some of the things that we know can lead to the difficulties. So we know that people that experience trauma sometimes have difficulty managing strong emotions, and that makes sense because in their experience these have been terrifying. So these are not just mildly unfortunate events, these are terrifying and awful events, which can mean that it can be so people are often wired for threat, extremely sensitive to these experiences, and that can make life a lot more difficult. And one of the things that can happen in that scenario is that that people can develop ways of managing those strong emotions. So if you think about that, makes entire sense when you think about what it must be like to live with a sense of overwhelming threat or feeling shut down or numb, that people will use a whole range of strategies to manage those things. And those strategies are often the things that bring people into services. So using alcohol, using drugs, overworking, over-exercising, all of the things that often create difficulties in life are the things that have actually started from a very predictable and understandable way of what we call surviving the surviving, managing the difficulties that have happened because of the result of the trauma. And if you think about difficulties trusting the relationship, again, totally predictable. If your experience of relationships has been that they can be scary or risky, why that you're walking into a room to get a service from? Why would you take that risk? So often people will be avoiding the services that you provide so that you don't have a chance to do the job that you do so well in order to improve people's life chances. And how many people are we talking about here? So we know that around 20% of women and about 5 to 10% of men have experienced childhood sexual abuse, and we think that's probably an underestimate. We know about a quarter of women have experienced domestic abuse. These are already high figures, but if we look under the bonnet in the services that you're often providing, often the stats are even more stark. So I've already alluded to substance use, that the World Health Organization has produced figures that shows that around 75% of people that use substances have experienced trauma previous to that starting, which again makes sense when we think about what we've been talking about. But also we know that once they're using substances, they're at high risk of further trauma. If we look at dozens and probably hundreds of studies across mental health, we show that about 50 to 70% of people using mental health services have previously experienced trauma. And in prisons, we have good figures for women in Scotland that around 90% of women in prison have experienced significant trauma. And if you think about victim witnesses on the other side of the justice spectrum, they have almost by definition experienced trauma. So we're talking about things that are very common and have predictable outcomes that can lead to a range of poorer outcomes for people's lives. So these are just a few that the research is particularly robust on. So we've already touched about substance use, mental health difficulties. We know that there's a higher risk of preventable diseases for people that have experienced higher levels of trauma. We know that people have found it more difficult to engage with education, and when you think about children who are living with threat, potentially wired for distress, tuned into a whole range of different things that they shouldn't have to be aware of, and how that maybe interferes with relationships. We know that about half of people in childhood will go on to have further experiences in adulthood. Is that adversity is not destiny. There is lots that we can do, and that's where trauma-informed practice comes in. Each and every one of us can contribute to a different outcome for people by offering a trauma-informed. So the ambition we have in Scotland is to have a trauma-informed and responsive workforce, and Scottish Government and COSLA and all of our partners have signed up for us. So this is where we can respond in ways that prevent harm, support recovery, and address inequalities and improve life challenges. So what does that look like? So I've already talked about a workforce that realises the prevalence of trauma. I've given you lots of stats today. Why don't you think about what the stats are for your population, where you start to recognise the impact of trauma, and where that may be creating barriers for people engaging with you, where some of the things that seems to make it hard for folk to engage, we could reframe in a way that is understanding, that reduces stigma, that increases compassion and allows us to engage with folk in a different way, where we can respond, where we reduce barriers, and where we recognise that people are absolutely doing the best, and where really that's not a typo. Relationships matter, real connections with people matter. We also, this is a really tricky one because nobody goes into work to re-traumatise people, but what's really important to recognise is where people are triggered or are recognising something in the present moment that reminds them of a traumatic event in the past, maybe a tone or a word or a way of holding yourself. People don't just remember a traumatic, that this reminds them of something, they relive that traumatic moment. So what you'll see in the moment is something that feels to the outsider disproportionate to what's going on here, but makes complete sense to the person who has been reminded and reliving an event that's previous in their life. So what we can do that we can avoid that is using those principles at the centre of the flower of safety, choice, collaboration, empowerment and trust. So I'm not going to go into this in much detail today because we have lots of webinars and opportunities for you to learn more about this. And this is about the new framework, but we want to sort of highlight that we have developed a whole range of training resources that are across the spectrum of different services that are underpinned by a knowledge and skills framework and by the trauma training plan, which will set out how to help you to think about this from an implementation point of view. We want to avoid spray and pray training, just scattering this. We want to get the right training to the right people with the right support that will allow them to deliver this, but also to deliver this with a recognition of staff well-being. The well-being of our staff is utterly critical component to a trauma-informed approach, because if you're not safe and well yourself, it's very hard to offer a service to other people in this very relational and connected way. So this whole package has to come together. And this is where the new framework is utterly critical in helping us to think about how we pull all of that together. And I'm incredibly excited about the next step around all of this. And I'm really sorry that I can't stay to join you for the whole discussion today. I have to be somewhere else. Bad planning on my part. But if there is specific questions for Nez, please don't hesitate to let Laura know and she will pass them on to me. And there's probably people around who are able to pick up most of the details around all of that. This is only a snapshot of the 50 odd organisations that have already signed the pledge and are on this journey with us. A tiny snapshot. It doesn't represent everybody at all, but I just want to show it to show the breadth and the scope of who's involved. And I am really looking forward to the next step of this journey together and all the learning that we can do from each other. Thank you very much.
organisations. Sandra, that was fantastic. I think, you know, the point you make at the end there in terms of this is obviously about individuals and the people that we're here to support in all the roles that we do, but it's also about us and looking after ourselves and making sure that we understand our own experiences so that we don't just focus on the what we do, but actually fundamentally the how we do. We will obviously be happy to share the presentation slides and so forth for everyone. Obviously, Sandra's second last slide had a link to all of the materials that are available, and if you've not had a look or not had the chance to use any of them, clearly we would encourage you to do so after today. So colleagues, thank you very much to Sandra. Sorry to see her go just now. We will have colleagues later on when we get to the Q&A session who will be able to pick up on any points that you may wish to ask. So thanks again, Sandra. Okay, without further ado, then I'm going to pass across to Shumila Ahmed. Shumila is the lead in terms of the Resilience Learning Partnership, and Shumila is going to take us through why we need trauma-informed organisations, systems and workforces. Shumila, and you've got your slides up already. You're a step ahead. Thanks. I'll pass to you now.
Thanks so much. Teams is a bit temperamental for me today as well, so bear with me, folks. As Simon said, I'm here to talk about the why. Why do we need trauma-informed organisations, systems and workforces? And there's a great saying that's often said along with trauma-informed practice, which is that it cannot be trauma-informed unless it is informed by those with lived experience of trauma. And so the organisation that I work at, Resilience Learning Partnership, is what we call a lived experience-led organisation. And these 3 bullet points I have here isn't something that I just wrote up for this presentation. Each of these bullet points actually come from our own vision, mission and priority and commitment areas. So people, as a lived experience-led organisation, our vision is that people with lived experience are at the heart of public policy decision-making and service design. Again, that old saying that goes hand in hand with trauma-informed practice can't be trauma-informed unless it's informed by those with lived experience of trauma. And as a lived experience-led organisation, our role as a training and education provider is to influence positive change through education, training, services, enabling services to better support people with lived experience. So again, one of the other tenets of trauma-informed practice is that it exists to address the barriers that exist for people in accessing the services that we all need to access for a healthy, balanced life. The doctors, the dentists, being able to interact with your kids' school or any other educational establishments, the criminal justice system if you find yourself in it, social work, all of those public services that exist out there that some of us will interact with and some of them we definitely will, all of us will interact with. GPs, dentists, often we call them, they're gatekeepers to the other services. If you go there and get a trauma-informed service in one service, then and you start to experience that in other services, that's where the build-up of trust starts to come back for people in services who perhaps don't have it. And for us, our own priority.
Oh, sorry, just to say your slides don't seem to be moving on for people.
What slide
Sorry.
am I on?
You're still on the first one. Sorry to interrupt.
Sorry. Have they moved now?
Not for me.
Is there any way, Laura, that we can take control for Shumila and do them?
Is that working?
Yeah, that's it, moved on.
Okay.
So are we on slide 2?
Yes, and I think you've taken back control, Shumila.
Right, and it's moving for me too. So sorry, guys. Just a bit
No,
like,
sorry to interrupt.
what the hell is she talking about? This is what I was talking about. So these 3 bullet points are not something that I just wrote myself. They're from our own strategic and priority commitments, as I said. And you know, our role is in walking alongside organisations and services to better understand the role that they play in people's lives and what that might mean for people with lived experience of complex trauma. Because as I said, one of the other tenets of trauma-informed practice is that it seeks to address the barriers that exist for people in accessing the services that they need to. And rather than talk to you about the real why, the reason we know the why and why it's so important is because we're a lived experience-led organisation. So around 95% of my staff have lived experience of complex trauma, and they also have a wealth of other experience, professional and educational. However, and some of them were previously participants and some of them are now staff. So what I've done is brought you some voice of some of our participants, many who have engaged in our tier pathway, for example, or our Crafty Kids project, which started up during the pandemic. And something that really comes through for me when I started to put these slides together was that if you can see the word choice, the word choose, the word collaboration, collaborate. These are being written by our participants, by themselves, when we're asking them how they're experiencing our service and what we do. We cannot underestimate the power and the significance of people being able to identify when they're experiencing the 5 key principles, for example, and then be able to articulate that back to us in a way that helps us understand what we're getting right and where we can do better. I have included positive messages today because I want to show you the why and what gives us the fire in our belly, but really can't underestimate the absolute value and power in people being able to recognise the 5 key principles. These are people's experiences. They're experiencing the 5 key principles of trauma-informed practice, and that is hugely significant. It's what keeps them coming back to our service and engaging, beginning a pathway of recovery, beginning to heal, move on, become empowered and take back control of their lives and do all sorts of amazing, wonderful things. I showed this to some participants, volunteers and staff yesterday in a wee dry run in our own consultation internally on this, and they suggested that I should actually share some stories with you. So I don't want to go into kind of case study mode and present a case study on people, but actually just some of the stuff. So one of the people who wrote one of these, one of the ones on collaboration, is actually a person I met about 2 years ago who, when I first met them, didn't know what the word collaboration meant and actually didn't know how to spell it. Last year, just before we closed up, that person was at the helm of a table with a flip chart with collaboration written on top by them and taking down other people's staff and participants' thoughts and reflections on how we do collaboration in the middle of a room full of a mix of staff, volunteers and participants from RLP. That's trauma-informed practice. That's recovery. That's healing. That's people moving on and forward. And that's all happened because we do trauma-informed practice and we've got pretty good at it. And the lived experience does really help. It brushes up your skills in this and your intuition. But so significant for me when putting this together as a practitioner that people are really seeing and identifying the 5 key principles. Next slide, has that moved on okay for you all? Yeah, brilliant. So again, empowerment, there's one that really stands out here for me. So how to put a PowerPoint together. And then after it, confidence, self-esteem, self-worth. I feel a 360 shift since starting the course. So because we introduced a practical thing of 365 actually and helping somebody get to grips with it, in a trauma-informed way, we did it in a trauma-informed way. You know, there's loads of courses out there where you can go and learn about Teams and Microsoft and Outlook. Are they done in a trauma-informed way? I would suggest not. And because we've been able to do that, then we got that added consequence of the confidence, the self-esteem, self-worth, getting self-esteem and self-worth, learning how to do PowerPoint. That's really significant. Huge post-traumatic growth there happening. And again, I can't underestimate how significant it is for the people experiencing it and for us, our staff that deliver it. I hope I've made, well, actually, there's one other story that I also really wanted to share, which is a young woman who I also met a couple of years ago who couldn't even look any of us in the eye when she first started engaging with us, to now being a crucial part of a promise mobilisation team in a local authority, and now stepping into a paid part-time role with the National Leadership Network. This huge. It's significant. This was a young woman who had real distrust in services, particularly any related to care experienced work or activities. And to see that change, to see that growth, to see that trust in services become a real thing and actually empower someone to take part in projects and work going on to make things better for those who come after them. And also with this person who's a young parent, taking that back into our own home, bringing our kids in to RLP and just approaching life in a very, very different way is an absolutely beautiful and very, very significant thing to watch. And again, here you see the consistency and being able to identify and name the 5 key principles, because people are experiencing them. That's why they can name it. I also wanted to talk to you guys about staff as well, because Sandra set me up beautifully, as did Simon. None of this is possible without staff wellbeing, and we know that only too well running an organisation where 95% of our workforce have lived experience of complex trauma. So some of this stuff is just from our staff satisfaction annual survey before the end of the year. First one says, I haven't worked in an organisation before that has encouraged you to say what you think. Working for an organisation where everyone's voice is heard makes for a positive working environment where people aren't scared to say what they think. Another person says, I do feel everyone is given a voice and consulted when decisions are being made or things are being created. The creation of the strategic document and staff handbook have included all staff. And the last one says, the org sessions, the check-ins, the wellbeing sessions, we are involved in so many decisions that would normally come from management. People often ask me, what do you do for the staff wellbeing in your organisation? Because people talk about it in this way. And I always tell them it's not any one thing. There isn't a wee remedy or a toolkit that I can give you. Running our organisation in a trauma-informed way produces this. This is the consequence. Staff are involved. They feel consulted. They feel that they're involved in decision makings. They are involved in the decisions that are relevant to their role and their department and their delivery. You know, we are quite wild with that at RLP because we can be. We're not a public service. We're a wee social enterprise that's nimble, and we can make quick decisions, and we can allow people to take control and responsibility and ownership. And that's all about staff becoming really empowered, actually, to take on that stuff and be really heavily involved in things like our decision-making processes. Next slide is actually, would you recommend working in our organisation to other people? Why or why not? People say things like, absolutely, being a trauma-informed org means that an individual has the correct support and guidance in the most trauma-informed manner, so they feel valued, respected, safe, and able to grow to their full potential. That's as a staff member, somebody's saying that. No talking about a participant, they're talking about themselves and other staff members. Someone else says, yes, think so many people saunter through life believing where they work is an all right place to work until they hit burnout or get so annoyed with toxic cultures. Culture's key in a trauma-informed environment. But I think until you work somewhere that is truly trauma-informed, then realise then places that you worked before were not as positive as it seemed at the time. Another person says, yes, absolutely, the most fulfilling and challenging and stimulating place I've ever worked. And I think we're making a genuine difference in people's lives. Another person says, I've never worked anywhere like RLP before, and it's something others say consistently too. This is why I'd recommend it to others. It's a truly wonderful place to work. And I thank my lucky stars every day I get to do what I do for a job. And the last one says, I think there's huge space for creativity and entrepreneurship. I think as we move forward, a real focus on balance and drive, adaptability and energy with structure, clarity and calm will add to the sustainability of the org and the well-being of individuals. So this is what staff are coming back to us in our annual survey with. And all of this, I can tell you with my hand on my heart, it's because we do things in a trauma-informed way. Now, I can admit we are lucky because we're in our 5th year of existence. We started out from scratch. It's much easier doing it that way. I totally understand the magnitude of what some of you will have ahead of you, but this is doable. Organisations are restructured and they revise how they do things all the time. It's totally possible, but everybody needs to buy into it. Everybody needs to be on board, and everybody needs to be walking alongside each other on the journey, because it isn't always easy, and trauma will come to the surface and at the table, but it's how we deal with that and how we implement those amazing strategies that trauma-informed practice can give us. And so much of that sits in our policies, procedures, because whatever practice isn't informed by theory, it's informed usually by procedure and policy. So I'm going to leave it there because my time is up, and happy to take any questions throughout the session. But I hope I've helped you understand the importance of why trauma-informed practice matters, and not just to people with lived experience, but to our general workforce as well. 5% of my workforce don't have lived experience of complex trauma, and they say consistently the same things too.
Thank you very much, Shamila. And I think going by all of the emojis that are going across my screen, that have been fantastically received, and as per the comments as well, many of which absolutely echo. You're inspirational as always, Shamila, and I think you've really brought it to life, both in terms of the experience of those using services, but the crucial bit about those working within organisations as well. So thank you for doing that. Some really strong and important messages there. Obviously, Shamila is going to be staying with us, colleagues, which is great, and will be a full part of the question and answer session that we've got coming up. But without further ado, and I know that we might feel like we're going a bit of a breakneck pace here, we're going to get on to Dr. Laura James, the trauma-informed training lead for the Improvement Service, who's going to take us through the framework and its importance and the role that it can play for you, and obviously how you can engage with it. So Laura, over to you.
Thanks, Simon, and it is always terrifying following Shamila and Sandra as well, so bear with me. I'm definitely not as engaging a speaker, but thank you so much to everyone for coming today. It's absolutely amazing to see such a wide array of colleagues from across different sectors, different organisations, different professions, and with different experience as well. So really glad you're all here today. So as Simon said, I'm Laura James, and I am the National Improvement Lead for our psychological trauma work at the IS, and we work in partnership with COSLA, Scottish Government, and NHS Education for Scotland on the trauma work. And our job is to really support local authorities and community planning partners with embedding a trauma-informed approach. So I'm here today as we've been working with a number of colleagues and partners over the past wee while to develop a tool that's designed to help organisations and services with embedding that trauma-informed approach. And now obviously we're consulting with our colleagues and wider stakeholders on the draft. So I should flag that there is absolutely zero expectation that you'll have had chance to look at the framework. I know what everyone's capacity is like at the moment. So this is really to give you some background to the development process so far. So think about how we've developed the framework, who's been involved, and what it's designed to do, and really just some helpful information to consider as you're looking through the draft. I'm really to encourage you to provide feedback as well. So let me move my slides on. Can I just check, are my slides moving on? Because Teams seems to be a delight today. Okay, I can see some nods. Teams always decides to do something different every time you use it. So as Sandra touched on earlier, we've got the knowledge and skills framework and the training plan from NES, which were published several years ago, and they do a huge amount of work in helping people understand what the workforce needs to know about trauma-informed practice, depending on their role and organisation. So Sandra didn't go into it in any detail, but that framework kind of it has 4 different levels. So it might be people working at the informed level only need to know kind of very little about trauma, but just needs to know kind of its prevalence, a little bit about its impact. And then you go all the way to kind of enhanced and specialists, who are people supporting people to recover from their experiences of trauma. So, you know, not everyone needs to know everything, but it really is dependent on people's role and what they're doing. So the knowledge and skills framework and the training plan have always been underpinned by that implementation science approach, that training itself is never enough. And that training plan in particular really highlights the key things that support moving trauma-informed knowledge into practice in an organisation. So that's things like leadership, engaging with people with lived experience of trauma, time and support for staff to implement the knowledge and skills they've gained and develop their confidence. So that's support like coaching, supervision, peer support, for example. And the Scottish Trauma Informed Leaders training that some of you may have been on, that is led by Nez, also really reflects this approach. So the tool I'm going to talk about today really builds on the approach that has been emphasised throughout the development of the National Trauma Training Programme, and it really thinks about organisations and systems holistically, so thinking about the environments, the conditions and the cultures that we know we need to be working in to help us work in that trauma-informed way. So with that in mind, the National Trauma Training Programme has done lots of engagement with a huge range of stakeholders over the last few years to find out what will support them to embed a trauma-informed approach in their organisations, to learn about challenges everyone's facing with this work. And we in the IS in particular have been engaging with local authorities, health boards and community planning partners around this. So some of the main challenges that came up were that people said they didn't know where to start with that wider trauma-informed change in their organisation. It was hard to know what to do, when to do it, if you should do some things before others. It was hard to know if what you were looking to do was considered good practice or consistent with what other people or organisations were doing in Scotland. And a lot of people also flagged up that it was also really hard to understand the contributions or impacts of a trauma-informed approach in their organisation. So people also said there's lots of really useful national and international tools out there about trauma-informed change in organisations, and there are some amazing ones. Trauma-informed Oregon from the States, TICPOT from Australia, for example. But colleagues in Scotland said they've often got no capacity to try and make it relevant for the Scottish context, to embed it in the Scottish context, or really to kind of understand how it supports their own wider priorities in their organisation or local area. And often those tools that do exist often focus on specific services or policy areas. So you see a lot of international tools focusing specifically on child protection or mental health settings, for example. So it often doesn't quite translate into the message of the National Trauma Training Programme that trauma is everybody's business. So why is it relevant to everyone in an organisation? So I'll just move my slides on. Okay, so I just wanted, before I talk a little bit more about the framework, I wanted to kind of talk about who's been involved, because I think that's a key part of this journey. So it's obviously been Scottish Government, COSLA, Resilience Learning Partnership, NHS Education for Scotland and the Improvement Service, who have been kind of developing this tool that tries to respond to these needs. But this has been a very much a collaborative effort, building on a lot of learning and expertise through profession, through leadership, through experience. So I just wanted to say a huge thanks to everyone who's been involved so far. So I won't talk about this in any huge detail, but I will say that the framework has been really developed by engaging with stakeholders and colleagues from local and national organisations who are working in frontline, non-frontline organisations, public third sectors, and as well as building on the knowledge and learning from our network of trauma champions and trauma lead officers who sit in local areas as well, who are doing a huge amount of work to embed this locally, as well as our transforming psychological trauma implementation coordinators as well. We've also had an advisory group feeding into this work, which has been co-chaired by Scottish Government and COSLA, and members of that are really diverse and bring experience through and knowledge through leadership, through experience by profession and experience of trauma. And they work locally and nationally and in public and third sectors as well. So we've got a really diverse range in that advisory group. I should also say Scottish Government have been working on updating an evidence review that was initially developed for the Knowledge and Skills Framework, and this updated evidence review really focuses in particular on what works in terms of trauma-informed change in organisations and services, and also thinking about what the evidence shows us about the impact of trauma-informed change for people affected by trauma and for staff as well. And at the start of this work, we also mapped all the existing, or all the ones that we could access, existing in international and national resources that do something quite similar. So, as I said, there's a number of tools out there that are kind of roadmaps, checklists, frameworks quite similar to the one that we've produced, that kind of go through what a trauma-informed organisation looks like. But as I said, these are often within other contexts, international, well, for specific services, for example. So we mapped all of the content of those so that we could understand what good practice looks like from those resources. And a number of those tools had also themselves been reviewed in kind of wider systematic reviews. So we made use of those findings where possible. We also wanted to build on what colleagues working in Scotland have told us would support them, and what people with lived experience have said they would want to see in organisations and systems if they were trauma-informed. And we've drawn on a huge amount of good practice that's already happening in Scotland. We know a lot of this work is already happening. A lot of what's in the framework is already what we're doing in our organisations. So I just wanted to emphasise that fact as well. This is nothing new. This is building on what's already happening. And then I should also say national partners also came together to map out a kind of logic model theory of change for trauma-informed organisations, systems and workforces. So if any of you have had a chance to glance through the draft, you'll see that we're still working on that visual, but that's really designed to help people understand the kind of potential short, medium and long-term outcomes of trauma-informed change in an organisation, and how they contribute to those much broader priorities that often outcomes a lot of us are often working towards, like the National Performance Framework, for example. So again, I won't talk about this in any huge amount of detail, but I just wanted to kind of give you an overview of the aims of the framework. So this is really about highlighting the key components of trauma-informed organisations, systems and workforces, raising awareness of the activities that are most effective in supporting organisations in this work, and helping organisations understand the impact or contributions of a trauma-informed approach over time, for staff, for people affected by trauma, and for the organisation's wider mission. Because trauma-informed approach, as we've kind of seen from Shamila and Sandra's inputs, it can, we absolutely know it supports, evidence shows that it supports the workforce and people affected by trauma, and often we come with both of those experiences. So part one of the framework is designed to help organisations conduct a self-assessment to determine and really reflect on where progress has been made to embed a trauma-informed approach and identify opportunities, challenges and future priorities, and really with the sense that this is a longer term piece of work. So we absolutely recognise that not all of this is going to happen overnight. So it's about determining, kind of thinking about where you are, starting with what you can and doing what you can, and taking it from there. And then part two is, as I said, designed to help organisations understand and think about the contributions of a trauma-informed approach over time, and kind of tell that story of what the impact might be. So I guess some key messages that I think are really vital for us to flag. We absolutely recognise this is coming out again in a backdrop of an incredibly challenging context. We know we're absolutely still feeling the effects of the pandemic. There's the ongoing cost of living crisis, workforce capacity and well-being. We absolutely understand that all of the challenges around that as well. So we really want this tool to be a supportive resource and recognises that context, and builds on all of the existing work and recognises all of the existing work that organisations are doing, and that, again, a trauma-informed approach isn't about anything new. It's about thinking about often small tweaks to how we work, and how a trauma-informed approach can support our existing priorities in our organisations. We're very aware of the capacity and fatigue in terms of the sheer amount of asks that are being placed on all of us at the moment. So I just wanted to flag, this is a resource that people have asked for as something that will support them. It's a resource that's designed, for organisations to engage with when they feel it's appropriate and ready. And it's a resource to help people identify what they're already doing and celebrate successes as well. It's designed to use, as I said, as a self-assessment. So it's about determining, it's up to organisations to determine what might be priorities for them, and thinking about, often trauma-informed change is about little things, little tweaks to how we work. So there might be some quick wins, but recognising that this is a longer-term approach. And I should also say this is absolutely not about asking organisations to collect new data or report on anything. It's not underpinned, not got a statutory underpinning. It's absolutely not a league table to compare one organisation or local area against one another. We absolutely know different places will have different priorities with this work, but it is designed to help build pictures locally and nationally, and that will support with determining priorities, thinking about where gaps and challenges are. I think if I could just make sure people can turn their mics off, please. Thank you. Just getting a bit of feedback. It's absolutely thinking about where the gaps and challenges are and highlighting successes and good practice. So in terms of audience, given the national ambition is that all workforces and services are working in a way that understands the impact of trauma and responds with that in mind. It's absolutely designed to be useful for any and all organisations. So I would say that's been a real challenge of pulling this together to make sure that it's broad enough and flexible enough to be used by any service or organisation. So it's designed for anyone in any organisation or service in the public, the third, the private sector, large or small, local or national, people offering frontline support and services, and those working in non-frontline as well. I did also want to flag that it's also designed, hopefully, to be useful for commissioners and funders to help them understand the benefits of a trauma-informed approach, what good looks like, and what if an organisation is saying they're working in a trauma-informed way, then what could be expected of them. Also for inspection bodies, to really help them and the organisation they support understand how trauma-informed approaches contribute to their own quality frameworks and standards, and are supporting all of that ongoing work already. And I should say that the National Trauma Training Programme are currently exploring how best to engage with those inspection bodies to ensure we're taking a joined-up approach with this work. So, and also, it's designed to be useful for elected officials, local communities and community planning partnerships to really help them gain a better understanding of the work that's being undertaken to embed trauma-informed approaches at a local level and the impact this is having. And I should say, from an improvement service point of view, given that we support local authorities and key community planning partners, I recognise many of you will be from other organisations or partners today. Obviously, on the caveat that we continue to receive funding, we'll continue to support local authorities with this work and support local authorities and their partners with using the framework and embedding those suggested activities as well. So just very briefly, I just wanted to give an overview of what the framework is attempting to cover. And this really builds on that learning around from implementation sites, but also from our colleagues who are doing this work. It really reinforces the fact that training for the workforce is incredibly important, but we absolutely know there needs to be a range of other things in place in an organisation to support embedding that trauma-informed approach. So, for example, we know we've all been there. If we receive training and want to work in a way, in that slightly new way, or tweak how we're working. But if we're working in a system or with policies and processes that don't allow us to do that, it's incredibly hard. It can feel incredibly we can feel a lot of disillusionment as well, and also we know that then that doesn't provide a consistent approach for people who are accessing support as well. So The reason why we talk about services, systems, organisations and workforces is because it's not just about how our workforce works, it's about how our organisations and systems are designed, how they operate, the kind of culture and environments that they create as well. So in the framework, you'll see that there's some key headings. I think there's 9, but we help people think about the importance of an organisation's culture, and Shamila touched on this. You know, it's really about thinking about how trauma-informed principles and values and ways of working are embedded in the DNA of an organisation, just as Shamila talked about in the Resilience Learning Partnership. How those principles of safety, trust, choice, collaboration and empowerment are hardwired into that day-to-day work, the decision-making, the policies and practice, and how a trauma-informed approach can become second nature to everyone in the organisation. We also talk about the need for that buy-in and commitment from senior staff and leaders to creating sustainable change, to modelling trauma-informed principles, to setting that accountability. We talk about the importance of staff wellbeing. We know that when staff feel looked after, they're better able to support service users, and we absolutely know we can't do any of this work without staff wellbeing being at the up front and centre. So it's absolutely vital. We talk about how important training is, but we talk about actually implementation support is incredibly vital, you know, for building confidence, for developing skills, for sharing learning and good practice as well. Also, how do we understand the impact of what we're doing? So what feedback loops do we have in place with staff, with people coming into contact with our organisation? What are they telling us about what's working and what's not working? Thinking about budgets, which I know is an incredibly challenging time at the moment, but thinking about what are the long-term costs of not doing this work? How might a trauma-informed approach support early intervention, reduce barriers to accessing specialist and universal services, for example? And as I said, a lot of working in a trauma-informed way are often about small tweaks to how we work, but recognising there might be some direct and indirect costs in organisations as well to doing this work. It's about thinking about how our policies support and reflect a trauma-informed approach. So I'm thinking about things like when we use language like no-shows or failure to attend, or have policies that are kind of a 3 strikes and you're out. What does that mean? What kind of barriers does that create to people who are affected by trauma, and what barriers does that create to them accessing services? And then we also think about how we design and deliver services. And I'm still not entirely sure we've got this one quite nailed down in the draft. So I think we need to do some more reflecting on it. But this is a huge one. This is about effectively how we think about someone's journey through a service or an organisation. So from their first point of access, whether that's a phone call, website, receptionist, through to the physical environment of our services and organisations, through to how people are signposted, or how to further support, what those pathways to support look like, how we share people's information, for example, thinking about how we can embed those 5 key principles in that person's journey through a service. And then we talk a lot about what a trauma-informed approach looks like, but also I think in the framework we try and think about what does a trauma-informed approach feel like, and think about meaningful engagement and power sharing with people with lived experience of trauma in shaping services and systems. So what does that mean in an organisation? And then obviously part 2 focuses on thinking about the impact or contributions of a trauma-informed approach in an organisation, and that's really providing prompts for organisations to think about what information and data are you already collecting that can help tell a story around this work. So for example, there's growing evidence that after implementing a trauma-informed approach within some organisations, staff reported improved satisfaction, improved communication and collaboration. So with the framework's trying to help people think about, well, what data might we be already collecting in our organisations that help us build this picture around the impact of a trauma-informed approach? So that might be through feedback loops with staff, through annual staff surveys, as Shamila showed, through staff retention data, staff sickness or absence, for example. So again, it's not about trying to collect lots of new stuff, but it's about what data have we got that we're already collecting can help us tell a story around this. I should also flag throughout the development of this framework, there's been discussion around whether there should or could be a standard set of indicators around the impact or contributions of a trauma-informed approach. Most discussion has felt like this isn't possible, and given the current context that we're all working in discussions with stakeholders, people really highlighted that again, this work needs to not be another ask and not something else to report on, but it might be helpful for you to reflect on as you're reading through the framework, and reflect on when and if you're able to give us some feedback on it as well. So finally, I just wanted to note a few key things. So one of the key challenges, very aware of how long it is. It is very long. This has been particularly difficult given that this framework is designed to support any organisation or service. So often we've found that some people want as much detail as possible, because we know that this work in particular can feel quite intangible and difficult to kind of grasp hold of. But we're absolutely aware other people do not want or need that kind of detail. So we'll be developing an exec summary as well, so we can kind of support both of those needs, and people can have a choice of what they want to engage with. And on that, we also know people will want to engage with this in different ways. Appreciate that all you've got is a PDF document at the moment, and we know that people want something much more interactive. So we're exploring options for how we can have something a bit more interactive on the National Trauma Training Programme website, which is currently being refreshed. But obviously at this stage, we're wanting to make sure we've got the content correct and nailed down before we think about that. And we'll also be thinking about how we present the print version, the hard copy version. Some of the feedback we've had so far is that it might be more helpful to have it much more as a workbook, for example. So happy to get people's thoughts in the survey on that as well. So I'd also encourage you, given the length, if it does feel too long for you, I'd really encourage you in the feedback survey to tell us what you think can be removed, what can be shortened, what could be simplified. That will provide incredibly helpful steer for the advisory group as well. And I should also say it will be an iterative document as well, aware that this document will, the learning and good practice that continues in Scotland will continue to inform this document, and obviously will be at the IS in particular, we'll be, once we've published the framework, we'll be looking to support local authorities and planning partners in particular with using the framework and test it out, so we can help inform future versions, and obviously use learning from other stakeholders and colleagues as well. So I hope that is helpful. I should just flag as well that we'll make sure we send around a link to the survey afterwards, but you should already have a copy. The survey closes on the 27th of February. It's pretty short, so it's not too onerous, and final publication is anticipated spring 2023, hopefully. But obviously any questions in the meantime, please just get in touch with us. But I will pass back to Susan. Thank you.
Just want to say thank you so much to everybody today who input into the session. So to Sandra and Shamila and Laura, but also to everybody else who contributed and asked questions and is helping us to develop the framework. It's just been really helpful to have that feedback. Just to remind you that you can provide further more specific feedback through the survey, and it closes on the 27th of February. So please do that, because it will just make sure the final version is as effective as it possibly can be in helping organisations to embed trauma-informed approaches. So it'd be great to get your responses on that. Just to remind you as well that we've been recording this session and we aim to share it with colleagues who can't make it today. So you know, hopefully that's okay with everybody. And you know, we're continuing to work with all our partners to make significant progress on the National Trauma Training Programme. And I think as well, I've mentioned some of the things that are sort of under development at the moment in the Scottish Government. So that includes the mental health and wellbeing strategy, which will be published soon. the trauma-informed is built into that. And we also talked about the dementia strategy earlier on. So I just wanted to say a big thanks to everybody, respond to the survey, and good luck in all the great work you're doing. Please share anything that you think is of interest and we can share on, and I hope to see you all soon.